good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to the Bloody Disgusting Network. The following show is just horrifying. Beware.
Welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking Chekhov's security alarm, we're talking slow motion, and we're talking white radio personalities named Kingfish. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking low-grade Bridget Fonda in the form of Seth Cohen's mother.
How dare you? How dare you, sir?
Everyone, we are talking Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, otherwise known Candyman 2. You might be asking yourselves, Horror Queers, why are you talking about this shit movie? And
Ouch. Okay. This movie does have fans.
No, it does have fans. No, we're actually discussing it because it does have a queer director in the form of future, directing juggernaut Bill Condon, which I think is insane. But also, it's not the obvious pick, right?
No, I mean, we will get to original flavor Candyman eventually, because that is a legitimately good film that is also not unproblematic, and there's plenty to discuss there. Mm-hmm. But I have always been fascinated by this franchise and its relationship to race and white ladies, and I just think there's a lot going on here that we can unpack.
There are a lot of white ladies in here, but I think we're going to need some help, Joe.
Yeah.
So we do have a special guest on today's episode. All right, everyone, they have been named Business Equality Magazine's Top 40 LGBTQ Under 40 for 2020.
Jesus.
They have written for such outlets as Complex Magazine, Out Magazine, Them, Essence, The Root, Blavity, and MTV News, and have also written over 100 articles about the Black queer experience. They are also the co-hosts of the Learnt podcast, as well as Jim Lanahan and Friends. And currently they are an instructor at the University of Redlands and New York Film Academy, where they teach research and representation in television and film. Whew, that's not even the half of it, y'all. But
Jeez.
Please welcome Doctor Jon Paul Higgins.
Yay.
Thank you for having me. I am so, I'm so excited to, break this down. I wasn't as excited when you initially asked me to watch it, I was like, I wonder why. And then I watched it and I was like, oh, now I know why. So I'm really excited to get into this.
Yeah, it's admittedly, so I had only seen the first one before, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I actually saw Candyman in high school, and I wasn't too crazy about it. I was actually that stupid 17-year-old that was like, well, this is really boring. It's not really that scary, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, because it's an adult film. This is adult horror.
It
is. No, and I rewatched it earlier this year. I was fortunate enough, pre-COVID, to see it on the big screen, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. I mean, again, this is we're talking 13-year difference here.
Right.
But I didn't know what to expect walking into this film, and it is a beast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the Candyman franchise is unfortunately the smallest of the big ones, if you want to consider it a big one, because it only has 3 entries. Only 2 of them went to theaters, and they all, they're doing interesting things, and yet they're also very odd.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm super excited that we're getting a new iteration that is, I think, going to finally get it right, because these previous iterations are just always missing the mark a little bit.
Yeah. I would say that my biggest thing was I felt like in the franchise itself. So I've seen all 3 of them, and I've seen. So I saw the first one and the second one when I was like you in middle. I think it was middle school or either early high school, and then I saw them again recently when they announced that the new one was going to come out. Me and my partner doubled down and we watched all 3 of them, and I think there's so much subtext around race that it gets muddled. I think that was, for me, what happened specifically in the second one that we're getting ready to break down. There's so much subtext around race and, the historical concept around, oppression / racism and slavery that you lose the whole story because I don't feel like it was done well. So,
well, it's also the POV we're coming at here. I mean, of course, as Joe mentioned, like the first one has its own issues, but then when this one brings in like the genealogy of Candyman,
yeah,
and you have these clearly white actresses, like
so white.
I mean, and there is. I mean, obviously, we'll talk about Veronica Cartwright's character and her racism, which is technically internalized racism, I guess.
Right.
You're right.
But like, yeah. So I actually did watch the third one right before we recorded this because I was like, you know what? Why not?
Yeah. Well, you almost want to see, does the third one double down on these mistakes, or does it try to improve it? What's going on there? And honestly, the third one is a campy clusterfuck.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's campy. It also brings in like Latinx and like Mexican lore, which I think is an interesting choice. Like,
okay, generosity. It's basically conflating two completely different cultures and saying, oh, well, this one will also give us a street parade for a key sequence. It's problematic.
Yeah. I think for me, it was just, I think the one thing that bothered me the most about this film, so there is, I mean, I felt like, because I'm trying to figure out what I want to say without you just totally smashing the film, because it's, I mean, for folks who enjoy horror films, it's fun. Like it is a fun film. I mean, and it's fun for 1995 fun. And that's what I mean. Like it's not a 2020 fun by any means, but I mean, you think 1995, we're not having conversations about, white supremacy the way that we are now. We're not talking about the white savior complex the way that we're talking about it now. So, 1995, I could see going to a theater and, the same tropes are being played out. This white woman, is working with underprivileged youth and she's doing the best that she can.
Yeah,
and
God bless her.
Yeah, God bless her and her brother who has struggled in New Orleans. And, and so but for me, where I start to get kind of like annoyed is the very much, like even the scene. So I'll say this specifically and then I'll shut up. The scene when they go back to the house and they're walking through the house and then they see the homeless people in the house and it just felt very, I don't know, a lot of the movie is really rooted in this elitist notion of this poor white woman is having all these problems and let's Candyman is coming to also take her and so she's scared and running from the black man. It's just, I don't know who, like, I'm like, why?
There's a lot. I mean, I think we're also, I mean, like, again, this is also, but I don't know about the third one, but I know the first two. I mean, we've also got white male directors on the first two films.
Okay.
And I'm fairly certain the writers are white as well. So it's another case of white people telling black stories. But even, I mean, again, we're not going to do this because we're going to obviously talk about like the themes of it and everything, but let's remove any socio-political commentary and just look at this as a horror film.
Yeah.
This is coming out in 1995. The horror genre is essentially dead. Like, this is about a year before Scream.
Oh,
and
okay.
We're in, like, the drudges. Like, it's like Halloween 6 comes out this year. Freddy's Dead killed the franchise, and Wes Craven's New Nightmare, like, didn't do any business. Friday the 13th is dead because Jason Goes to Hell was a flop.
Yeah.
This is right before Scream revitalizes the horror genre, and it's marketable again. So... Even as a horror film, I if you're just looking at like just for pure popcorn entertainment, I don't even know. Like, I gave this a 2.5 out of 5. I think it's totally middling. Like, I think there's some things it does well, it's some things it does not do well. The jump scares in this movie are obscenely bad.
Yeah, Bill Condon needs to work on that.
I will say that he calls them boos. I listened to his commentary and he admits, he was like, I think I was just really insecure directing this, and so I just put in a lot of boos.
Okay.
But there is one scene. One scene,
it's a choice.
It's in the house, the scene that John just mentioned, where basically like the husband walks out and like the Annie character walks out and like she jump scares him by like grabbing his shoulder. But the problem is you see her behind him. Like, you see her walk behind him before the jump scare. So it's like, it's not even a well done jump scare.
Yeah. There's a lot of, and I even think just the way that, I don't know, I mean, there's so much. So this is the thing, I don't know about you, but this was what I was thinking. I've gone to New Orleans twice and there's just this energy that New Orleans has. And I was even thinking to myself, for, being somebody who writes, I think to myself, like, how could they have captured that energy in the film? Like, there's a lot there. And I felt like for me, even just on the horror levels, right? You think about, I mean, I'm going to take it outside of the film. So when even thinking about Coven, right? And we think about American Horror Story, I felt like Ryan Murphy did such a good job with that season in capturing the kind
the
of
flavor.
Yeah, the flavor and the like the quote unquote witchery. I don't really know what to name it, but there's just this energy that New Orleans has, and I felt like I didn't get it in the film.
You're right. I actually do hate Coven, but that aspect of it, I do think that it does really well. So Condon, I didn't pull too many quotes from his commentary, although there are a couple that I think are really good. He liked the setting of New Orleans, and I actually think the setting is great given the story we're being told.
Right.
But he wanted to make it not like. He wanted Mardi Gras to be a backdrop, not to be like the focus. So he intentionally didn't shoot a lot of scenes or like have that party flavor, that life of energy that you're talking about. I'm admittedly an upper middle class privileged white boy who grew up in Texas, but my entire family is from Louisiana. My mom grew up in a tiny town called Mandeville, which is about 20 miles outside of New Orleans, so I would go there a lot growing up to see my grandparents. And it is definitely different. Listeners, if you've never been to New Orleans, I would recommend going, not even during Mardi Gras, to be honest. I actually
Just
prefer...
go.
Avoid the Mardi Gras scene.
I can't do Mardi Gras anymore. I don't have the capacity for it.
The liver capacity, yeah.
But it is a weird choice, right? Like, you have this awesome setting, which, to be honest, isn't seen in the horror genre that much.
Right.
I mean, I honestly, even for a film, I'm thinking the closest I can come to is Adam Green's Hatchet, and even then it's a prologue.
Yeah, they do a couple of thrillers. Like, I'm thinking Double Jeopardy spends a significant amount of time there. But again, it actually feels reminiscent of that, where it's almost a tourism perspective of New Orleans. Like, clearly these people don't have a relationship to this city in the same way. So they're like, okay, we've got parades, we've got crypts, we've maybe got a bit of bayou action. It feels a little checklisty to me.
Very much that.
Well, okay, so obviously we have a lot to discuss. So I don't really have much production information other than, so this comes out 3 years after the first film and is released March 17th, 1995. So I actually think that must be intentional, because I wonder when, sorry, I'm looking for the date for Mardi Gras, because I was trying to see because Mardi Gras is always February or March.
Yeah, I think it's right before Lent. So when is, like, isn't Lent?
Well, so
they're trying to hit on the Lent angle.
It changes every year. That's the thing. So yeah, it's always, Mardi Gras is always 40 days before Lent. That's my Catholic boy coming out. But the church determines when Lent is, which then determines when Mardi Gras is.
Oh my God.
So Mardi Gras 1995 was actually February 28th, the day after my 6th birthday. So I do wonder, because this is released on St. Patrick's Day, if they did it to like time with kind of like a post Mardi Gras Lenten thing. I don't know.
Probably.
So the Bernard Rose, who directed the first film, he wrote and directed the first film. He was asked to pen a script for the sequel because obviously Candyman was I don't even want to say it was a big hit, but it was a successful horror film given everything else that was coming out around the time. His script was rejected, and there was okay, I actually want to know what y'all think of this quote. So this is from Virginia Madsen. It's a more recent quote, but she said that they originally wanted them to do Candyman 2, with Bernard involved and Virginia Madsen still in a lead role in some capacity. But they didn't like Bernie's idea for the sequel. They made the Candyman into a slave, which was terrible because the Candyman was educated and raised as a free man. Bernie wanted to make him like an African-American Dracula, which I think is so appealing to the African-American community because they finally had their own Dracula, which... my mindset on that is, well, like blaxploitation and Blackula exist, so
right.
Yeah, although there is a fraught relationship to blaxploitation as well.
Yeah.
Right, because she goes, the Candyman was a poet and smart. He wasn't really a monster. He was sort of a classical figure.
Okay.
Joe and I were kind of discussing this because I was like, does the sequel retcon what they do with the first movie? Because I know we get that lecture. The opening kill of the second movie is the book guy. He is in the first movie as the one who tells the Virginia Madsen character Helen about Candyman's past. I thought he was a slave in the first movie. I thought that was always indicated, but maybe I was wrong.
No, actually, and again, I could be wrong too, but I went into the second movie with the assumption that we all knew that he was already a slave. Yeah. So I did, and that was ultimately kind of what initially, I guess, happened. Like, but then there's even this notion of like, there's still the story of like where he came from and why he kind of lurks that area. That's right. It's very much not clear. Like, even just I don't know.
No, because
it's confusing.
Slavery aside, the concept of, okay, like, yeah, he was with a white woman, like this mob killed him, they did the whole Candyman thing, they spread his ashes over the ground that would become Cabrini Green.
Okay.
That's the whole thing of the first movie, and so watching the second one, when we get the flashback, I was like, wait.
We already know this.
Yeah. Condon does confirm that the flashback to his death does take place in Chicago, but I was like, okay, but his lover is there, so he's born in New Orleans, and they run away to Chicago together. The mob chases them to Chicago. They murder him, spread his ashes, and then she goes back to her plantation in New Orleans with the magic mirror. I'm really confused.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's possible that, this is a lot of speculation, but if she was a wealthy white woman, she might have had family and real estate that when she didn't have a lover and she found herself pregnant without a husband, she goes back home. But like, none of that is in there. Like, this is us piecing things together.
So the scene towards the end when the woman is reading to her daughter and they have the book, that was what made me kind of wonder if that's what the storyline was that her family is connected to him because of, like, so you talk about the woman being pregnant. I'm wondering if that was her mother or her great grandmother, and then that, you know what I mean? That's where the line works?
100%. That's what they're saying.
Okay,
like,
yeah.
These white ladies are all direct descendants of him, like 16 generations removed.
And there's a discussion to be had there, again, as white women who are mixed race essentially, but they don't, they're obviously white passing. This movie is not interested in having that conversation.
Right. And that's what made me so eerie about, like, okay, so when I got to like the end of the film, I'm going, well, why is he chasing her specifically? Like, we never really,
I don't know.
We don't know that.
And what does he want from her, right? Like, I think this movie is fascinated with the idea that, oh God, it sounds terrible to say, but I feel like the movie is interested in how Black people can haunt white people. And there's maybe a story to be had there, but like it's unclear what it is he wants from his descendants and why he's doing this to them. Like, at least in the first film, the idea is that he's trying to keep his own memory alive. Like, it's a little bit Freddy Krueger-ish, where his power is in people's belief in him. Whereas here it's just like, I just want you for reasons unknown. I'm going to murder you.
Right.
Well, and so watching the third one today, though, someone says a quote in the third one. Again, I know it's not really important because it's not in this movie, but where they say, oh, the Candyman is the embodiment of the hatred of the people that murdered him. And so I was like, oh, that gives me kind of Grudge vibes, where it's like, okay, because, in the first one, it's like, well, why is Candyman killing all these poor Black people and not going after the white people, And I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense, though. If the Candyman is not actually Daniel Robitaille, if he is just the embodiment of this hatred of these white people, it just takes the form of Daniel. That makes more sense to me. But again, it's not mentioned for me, I don't think, until the third movie.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is a lot of the holes in the second movie. I think I think there's a lot of holes in the entire franchise that I think, and that's what happens when you have two different directors or you have two different writers with different visions. And so that's kind of what I felt about the second Candyman. I was going, okay, there's a lot of holes in this film. And I think ultimately, this film is more obsessed with this idea of the damsel in distress vibe that lived in a lot of the horror movies in the early 90s, right? This notion of this, because that was the specific scene that made me question, like, okay, well then why didn't he kill her? Was when her boyfriend or fiance, I think he was, brought her like the breakfast and then he kills him. I'm going, well, why didn't he just kill her too? Why chase her around New Orleans, for an hour and 30 minutes when you could have just killed her right then and there? Like, it didn't make sense to me.
He's just fucking with her.
I think when we get to the climax, because I have the exact same question. I do not know, because he does want to kill her, but she is his descendant. She's like his great-great-granddaughter or whatever. But why does she need... I don't know why she needs to die, but I digress.
Yeah.
We'll work through it as we go through the plot.
Yeah.
So again, I'll rush through this a little bit, but basically, Bill Condon is brought on to direct this film. I don't really know why, but in case you had any doubt that this was a gay man, and listeners, if you don't know who Bill Condon is, he would actually go on to his next film after this. He would be Gods and Monsters, which is the film with Brendan Fraser and Ian McKellen that looks at the late years, or like the end of the life of James Whale, the director of Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, and previous episode, The Old Dark House. Mm-hmm. But he would also go on to direct Kinsey, Dreamgirls, Twilight Breaking Dawn 1 and 2, and the 2017 Beauty and the Beast remake with Emma Watson.
Oh, okay.
He also co-wrote the Rob Marshall Chicago with Renee Zellweger, and he also co-wrote The Greatest Showman. So...
So he likes him some musical theater and some sparkly vampires.
He does like musical theater because, so when asked why he wanted to do this movie, he says, I thought that Bernard Rose had made the scariest movie since the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and it was interesting to see where, long pause, it reminded me of that moment in Broadway musicals when a chorus line came out, and suddenly there was a gay character on stage, almost acknowledging the fact that for years the audience for musicals had been a gay audience. Well, it was the same with Candyman to a degree, that suddenly it reflected the African-American experience, and they had been such a loyal audience for horror movies over the years. I thought the way that it took the basic ideas of horror and reinvented them was really good. I just love that he, brings in gay Broadway things into this comparison.
Yeah,
the intersectionality.
It's I don't see it, but okay, girl. I don't see it, but all right.
Well, and it's also a chorus line wasn't the first Broadway show, musical, or play or otherwise to have gay people in it, but okay.
Right. And that's kind of what I said, that's why watching the film and as I'm replaying it in my head, there's just a lot of questions that I have as to why. I think that's the biggest thing for me. I always tell people when you start to write and you start to really start to kind of step back and watch things or rewatch things, you start asking, yourself, I wonder why they made that decision. And there was a lot of watching.
There's a lot of why.
Yeah, there was a lot of why. Even the scene when she's getting the snow cone, I'm going, why? I don't understand that scene at all. I don't know why it's there. I don't understand the connection between her and that man. None of it makes sense to me. There are so many question marks that I have watching this film.
I have a theory about that one.
I will say though, and this is for y'all and listeners, if y'all get a chance, the Scream Factory Blu-ray, Condon's commentary, it's from the 2001 DVD, so it's not a modern one. So, I think if he recorded one today, he'd probably have different things to say about, especially the depictions of race in the film.
Yeah.
But he's still very forthcoming about it. He's very much aware of what he likes, what he thinks he failed at. He gives a really honest and good commentary that I think is actually a really good watch. It doesn't really make me appreciate the film more, but it makes me understand again some of those decisions you're talking about more.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Again, March 17, 1995 release date, released by Gramercy Pictures, and we got a runtime of 95 minutes. I don't know the budget for this film. It looks relatively low for a theatrical film, but I don't know. It opens in the number 2 spot with $6 million, and that is behind the movie Outbreak in its second weekend. That's timely.
Okay.
It goes on to gross $13.9 million, so not a huge hit, but no. I would bet that it did make its money back.
I don't know. I get the impression that this was probably a $15 million production.
Oh, I guess, maybe low budget for 1995 for this type of movie was $15 million.
Well, I'm thinking this gives off a Lords of Illusion vibe to me, or a Lord of Illusion vibe.
I can see that. I mean, it is Barker, so... And actually, because Barker was involved with this one, too, because Condon does mention, talking to Barker on set and things like that.
Okay.
But yeah, it is critically reviled. We're looking at a 28% of Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 4.33 out of 10. Roger Ebert gave it a bad review, and shocker, right? It was actually, I think he put it in his most hated films of all time list, the book that he did. But his big thing was they could be making a grand commentary on slavery. Instead, it's quote unquote just another slasher movie. It's well, you can do both. This movie just chooses not to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
And we get a Letterboxd score of 5.2 out of 10, which I think that seems pretty much in line.
Yeah, this movie is halfway there.
I think that's very real.
I don't have anything else to say. That's pretty much my spiel.
So I was just gonna say real quick, the box off. Well, the budget for the film was around $6 million, and it made 13. So it made up. It basically made its money back and a little bit more. But yeah, the cumulative gross worldwide was 13,940,383. So
there you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So it must have been then that it just wasn't quite good enough / those reviews prevented it from having a theatrical third film.
And just a heads up in terms of diminishing returns from the first film did make about $25 million in 1982. Okay. So it made about half of what the first one made.
Okay. Yeah. And also got slaughtered by critics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this film kicks off with a reading and also a publicity stunt in support of his new book on Daniel Robital, aka Candyman. So this talk is being delivered by Cambridge scholar Dr. Purcell, played by Michael Culkin.
Openly gay actor.
There we go. Okay.
Oh, cool.
So after this stunt, he is confronted in the streets of New Orleans by hothead Ethan Tarrant, played by William O'Leary.
Yeah, he's He is a character that is in this movie. I don't even know what to make of this character. Like, I mean, I know he's there, but like he's here to pop up in the beginning, be in jail for a good amount of time, and then die.
Basically. That is basically what he was there for.
He's the inciting incident, but also we have all of the Annie at school stuff, which is really how she gets into the Candyman action. Mm-hmm. So it's, yeah. So anyway, so Ethan blames Purcell for his father Coleman's death, which we will come back to later.
It's already getting convoluted though, right? Like when I was watching this, I was like, wait, what? Who are we talking about?
Right.
It's definitely a more protracted opening kill sequence than I expected. Mm-hmm. Like, I couldn't figure out whether I was supposed to care or pay attention to the intricacies of these interactions. So I was actually kind of glad when Purcell just goes to this bar, he cruises a black man in the bathroom, and then he is murdered by Candyman, played by Tony Todd.
I didn't pick up on that, but yes, Condon does say that he and Culkin talked openly about this because they're both gay. And yeah, they decided to make it be like, oh, he's cruising this guy in the stall with him.
You didn't pick that up? He is making fuck eyes at this guy when he comes out of the stall.
I thought it was like a racist thing where he was like
he's scared of him?
Yeah, that's what I got. I did not get cruising at all.
Yeah.
Maybe I was just on like high gay alert.
Probably. And that's okay. Mm-hmm.
It's like one of those siren lights that they have on police cruisers, except that it's a strobe ball, like a disco ball.
A disco light, yes.
But no, but I'm actually glad that you picked up on that, because I mean, it's just it's the only bit of queerness that I really have in the film, but it's just, you know, like, oh, like these two gay men work together to put a moment of queerness into this like slasher sequel, even though, yeah, I don't know if it really comes across like that for everybody, as evidenced by me and John's reaction.
Yeah, because I genuinely thought he was like, oh, my pearls, when the black man came out of the stall. That's what I, like, again, for me, that's what I got. And that's probably because that's the way I live anyway, where I'm always like, you know, everyone's sort of on guard when black people are around. So that's where probably, because of everything, my mind was in that moment.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
That is fair. Yeah. So that is our opening kill, and now we can cue the credits. And then we get some ponderous voiceover, which unfortunately will persist throughout most of this film.
Do y'all like this?
No. It sucks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was not a fan of this radio personality, the Kingfish, if only because, to me, I mean, it does have a function, so it establishes that there's a timeline to this film. Right. We are 3 days until Mardi Gras, which is a carnival, which we are told by the Kingfish is also known as Farewell to the Flesh, which is the subtitle for this film. And it makes sense, but I also don't feel like this character, this voice, contributes anything meaningful to the dialogue. Like, do we need to know any of that information? Could we have not figured it out in any other way?
Well, I hate it.
I mean, how else would we know why the film is called Candyman Farewell to the Flesh?
Oh my God. What, is a microfiche segment not available?
Yeah. I will say that, so like the box for this movie, this is one of those VHS covers that I would see on Blockbuster all the time, and it would always creep me out, because it's like Kelly Rowan with, like, you know, the bees around her, she's a honeycomb, and like, it's I imagined it like being way more intense as a child, and so watching it finally this week, I was like, huh.
Yeah, it's definitely not.
It's definitely not scary. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Intriguing? Yes. Scary? No.
Right. So we are hearing this voice as we are in the passenger side of a vehicle, which is driven by a vulnerable white lady, Annie Tarrant, who is Ethan's sister, played by, as you said, Trace Kelly Rowan. And
Mrs. Cohen.
Yeah. I mean, she's a very attractive lady. I feel like she becomes a much better actress by the time she's in the OC, because...
Yeah, this is not a good performance from her. I'm sure it's a combination of script issues, but holy fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. She is defined by her hair, I find, in this film. So it's important to note that she is listening to this radio broadcast, and she is driving through a very scary black neighborhood en route to her teaching job at St. Vincent's School. It just immediately, and I don't know how I would have felt if I had have watched this back in 1995. I think I rented this with my sister in the late 90s, and I was younger, so I wasn't really paying attention. But it's just so ham-fisted that it's like, okay, here's our protagonist, and also you hope that she's got these doors locked as she's driving through this neighborhood, and it's literally kids playing basketball and people just looking at her. Like, but it's framed so threateningly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in this current moment, I was like, fuck you, movie. Just fuck off, really.
We're getting here, too, is basically like Dangerous Minds, but Candyman.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
very much that. It goes into this whole idea of, you know, I'm driving in to save these people. That's literally what I get when she gets out of the car and he's like, "Why are you here? You need to go home." Like, it's just she's like, "I have to save these black children." So I don't know. Yeah.
But the film doesn't even want to really commit to that. Like, it's so hesitant to say, like, yeah, that's why she's here. It more uses it as a reference to say, no, she's a good person because she's willing to come and help these kids, but also she doesn't give two shits about them when her brother gets in trouble.
Right.
Well, but that's the thing, too. You know, it's like Dangerous Minds, like, you know, as problematic as that is, and it's very much a white savior film, like, at least that's what the movie's about.
Right.
This movie is just putting it in here like, oh, look, this is what she does. But, like, yeah, there's no interest from the film in having a dialogue about it. And especially even when Matthew disappears later and then just reappears for no fucking reason.
That,
yep. It's just like, all right, well, I guess that's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've been hanging out at your slave house this whole movie. Oh, fuck off.
I've been at your slave house. Oh God. The ghetto. Yeah.
Because that is a plot point in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't even think about it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, so she gets this quick introduction to sensitive student Matthew, who is played by Joshua Gabrant Mayweather. He's cute. He gets nothing to do. And then she is called home by her drunken Southern Belle mother, Octavia, who is played by the wonderful Veronica Cartwright. If you're going to have somebody be a racist, drunk old white lady, you could do far worse than Veronica Cartwright.
Well, yeah.
So this movie takes itself very seriously, but this performance
don't say.
No. but this, especially with her accent, like, I was like, I don't know if she's being campy or not, because that character, I got a very campy, but it's like that, you know, that like what Jenna Malone was doing in Antebellum, like that borderline, like, over the top racist character, like, not quite on that level for me, because she doesn't get the same dialogue, but, like, just, I don't know, like, I was kind of getting that vibe from her throughout this, and so it was a bit tonally off from what everything else in the film was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting heavy, like, Rue McClanahan vibes from...
Yes, very much that, yes.
Like, if only she had been less boozy and more sexy, we could have substituted in Rue McClanahan for this.
Very much
Trace,
that.
do you even know who I'm talking about?
Yes, I know Golden Girls, Joe.
Okay, just checking. Just checking.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, so Octavia is drunk. She is very upset, and she needs Annie to go to the police precinct because Ethan has confessed to Purcell's murder, because that is still a thing that has happened at this point in the film. So Annie heads to the precinct. There she meets cool Detective Pam, who's played by Faye Hauser. Again, an interesting character who gets jack shit to do in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Her last scene, I didn't realize it was going to be her last scene when it happened. And I was like, oh, you're just out of the movie now.
Oh, yeah, because this movie wants to have cops, but it doesn't know what the fuck to do with them.
Right. That's what I felt the whole entire movie.
Like, to the point where you're just like, well, just don't. It reminds me of me when I was a high school kid trying to write screenplays and being like, I'm going to have cops in here, but I don't know what cops do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just have them question someone.
Well,
that's what cops do, right?
And it's a through line. Yeah, it's a through line of all these three films, too, where it's like your white female lead is constantly framed for these murders by the Candyman. And it's like, I mean, I guess on that level, it's like, cool, like, let's frame all these murders. But it's like such like a retread. Like, and that's what the problem is, too, because we already know the secret, quote unquote, of Candyman. So the whole investigation of this film just feels like it kills the pacing, because it's like, she's not really doing anything we don't really, like, know already. I mean, yeah, we get the genealogy reveal later, but even then it's kind of like, I mean, meh.
Yeah, it's a middling procedural investigation film that doesn't have a good payoff.
Nope. None of the payoffs are like, yeah, they're never there. I don't know. I just, even when you think you're about to get one, it falls very, very flat.
Yeah, or they repeat it.
Yeah, like even down to in the precinct when, so I know you're probably going to go there, but when the young woman is talking to her quote unquote brother, it just, that whole scene is very much like, why? Like, I just don't, I don't know. Like, I just don't know. I don't understand why.
The subtitle for this episode is just "Why?" ? Like, and to clarify, like, I'm not saying that this is a bad movie.
Right.
It's just, it's so middle of the road, and you're like, at least commit to being bad, or stop trying to be so good.
I do wonder, like, if I had seen this 10 years ago, would I have enjoyed? I mean, and again, I think it's fine. It is a passable film. Like, it is a solid C. But I do wonder if, just because of the things that it's not taking, like the missed opportunities that it has, talking about that makes it a more interesting film to me, because it presents all these things. It just doesn't follow through with any of them.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, like, 10 years ago, Trace would have had the knowledge or, like, anything to even recognize that in the film. I would have probably been looking at this just as a horror sequel and, like, is it good, you know?
Oh, I 100% gave this movie a pass when I watched it the first time. It never even occurred to me that it was problematic or that it was muddying the waters. I was just kind of like, oh, I don't really love the cop stuff.
as we say about every horror film, by the way.
There's a lot of bad cops. Okay, so speaking of bad cops, we also have judgy prick detective Ray Levesque, who is played by David Giannopoulos.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. David G. And these two detectives really think that Ethan, this guy who doesn't seem to have much of a temper outside of confronting people in well-lit New Orleans streets, they think that he has killed at least 4 people.
He's a freak.
But he did confess to it inexplicably.
Now, one thing that this movie also doesn't seem to know very well is that there are things like lawyers that exist.
Right.
And I don't know if either of you were like, what the fuck?
Where is his lawyer? Yes, that was the question that I had. But as I was thinking about that moment, when his sister walked in, I'm thinking to myself,
where is his representation?
Yeah, who's representing him? Even his mom. Like, why isn't his mom in the room with him? Why would they send the sister in? That was the question I had. Why are we sending the sister in when the mom is there? Like, why are we not bringing the family in to have this conversation with him about the supposed death of this man? I don't know.
Oh no, John, she's too drunk. She simply could not make it to the precinct that day.
Well, but that's what happens, right? Because like Annie's in school, like rescuing those poor children, and like the mom is like drunkenly calling, like, you gotta help your brother. It's like, okay, but like,
I'll drop everything.
Yeah, I'm like, y'all are rich enough to be able to live here, but you don't have money to send him a lawyer. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's hilarious because Annie fully has a conversation with Ethan. Like, this movie loves exposition, so it's very much like, tell us about Dad, tell us about this, blah blah blah. And meanwhile, these two detectives are just sitting on the other side of the double-sided glass,
right?
You know, like taking notes, being like, cool, we're going to use all this to nail this asshole to the wall. And you're just thinking, oh, I don't think your case would be able to move ahead because you probably didn't even read this guy his rights.
Right. You just brought him in.
I will say I was also very confused because it seemed like Paul, the creepy older dude who is hanging around Octavia, the mom, I was like, is he a lawyer? Is he just a family friend? He's got weird sexual chemistry with Veronica Cartwright. And then it is revealed that this character, who is played by Timothy Carhart, is actually Annie's husband.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that Annie's husband?
I was so confused. I was like, who is this creepy old perv who is like manning this bar? Like, what is this relationship? And then they go home and fuck.
Okay. Now that makes a lot of sense.
Because it's not clear. Like, when we are first introduced to this character, it seems like he is a side hustle for the mom. Like, there is no I mean, they have no chemistry, Annie and Paul, so that doesn't help. But also, there's no, like, hi, husband, peck on the lips, like looping of the arms, or even anything to cue us that these people are fucking even remotely close to touching each other's dangly bits. Nothing.
It's weird. All of it is weird.
Okay, so they decide that based on Ethan's information, they're going to go to the old house, because this family is so fucking rich that they have this giant palatial townhouse, and then they apparently also have this old derelict my balls colonial home that is rotting somewhere.
Yeah. The interesting part for me was it said that the house had been sitting there for 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, do houses really look like that if they're not? I don't know. Like, I don't know. It was weird. Why would the house be there for 13 years? It was just interesting to me.
Like, wouldn't it have been cleaned up and sold? Wouldn't it have been demolished?
Yeah.
It just, like, no. They're like, oh, well, Dad died here, so let's just let it go, but also not keep it up.
Right. Yeah.
Let's pay taxes on it, but let it go.
I think it's around this time too that we see her trying to like do a self-portrait of herself. Did y'all pick up on any themes with that?
The artistry in the film?
So, okay. Annie is unable to finish a self-portrait of herself because she doesn't know who she is or what her family identity is, which comes into play as she unravels the mystery of her genealogy.
Wow. It's not that she's a bad artist. She just can't. She can't paint herself because she doesn't know who she is.
Yes, it's all symbolic.
So is that what that shot? And I'm probably getting ahead of myself here. Is that what the whole thing is when she goes into that boy's room with the dad and the artistry is hanging in his closet? Is that what that whole scene is about? Is about her and her own struggle with her art?
I mean, that's definitely. I think that's part of it. I think it's also meant to be that Matthew has a better, I mean, you could read it as Matthew has a better sense of who he is, but also that he has a better idea of what is actually happening. So his obsession with Candyman paints him as a bit more of a clairvoyant because, of course, that's also a role that white filmmakers like to give black characters in horror films. Mm-hmm, this person's a savant. They'll save us.
Well, that the third one does the same thing where it's like the black best friend who gets killed halfway through the movie.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the black best friend, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. They're always.
How are you? How are you, white person? Are you okay?
Oh my God. That Rachel True line in horror noir kills me because it's not funny, but also so funny. Because you're just like, yes, we could do a supercut of black best friends asking their white girlfriends how they are. No, but how are you? Mm-hmm. God. So inside the house, they find squatters, and we get a view through her very nicely framed window of the nearby slave quarters. And then we also climb through, basically we do a redux of the first film where she climbs through a hole in the wall, and we find that there's a whole room painted with Christ and church-like imagery of Candyman.
I do like this idea, right? Because the first film's set in Chicago, this is in New Orleans, so it's almost like Candyman's like a disease. It's like a disease. It's like that urban legend myth where it's like, the more people talk about it, the more it spreads, the more real or not real it becomes. I think it's a really cool idea. And that's it. That's it.
I'm interested to know if the two of you would agree with this, but this film really wants to treat Candyman almost like a figure worthy of worship. Mm-hmm. Like, I know that it's a little bit in there in the first film, but there's so much religious iconography, and it reminds me a lot of some later Hellraiser films. Yeah. Where it's an investigation that leads to people who worship these deity-like figures in a way that resembles a kind of Christ-like mythology.
I think for me, because, and this may be just my own perception, again, I'm not a native from Louisiana nor New Orleans, but because it is such a very spiritual place, right. I maybe was wondering if the director or the writer was trying to play with that. It didn't come across well if that was the intent, but I will say that I think that because it was such we're in New Orleans and we're so close to, I felt like there was a lot of commentary, even though it wasn't a strong commentary on Catholicism as a whole. Right. Even with just the whole notion of like the farewell to the flesh and Lent and all of these other things. So I felt like when you got into there and you saw the actual, Candyman on the wall, it was very much kind of this idea of like he's always watching you, kind of like God's always watching you, or Jesus is always watching you, in the ways that it's painted in religion.
Yeah, I think they were going for a more Baroque aesthetic, but you're right, John, because the architecture of New Orleans just lends itself to all of this, and because so much of it takes place like in, I mean, honestly, I thought they were in a mausoleum at first, and then I realized it was the slave plantation house.
Slave plantation house.
I almost just wish that the film would have played with this more. Like, this moment where she comes through it, I was like, okay, here we go. This is the good stuff. Because there is that kind of gothic sensibility. And, you know, it doesn't hurt that this is also where we're starting to get tinklings of Philip Glass's iconic score. However, briefly, they really just don't want to use too much of it, and that's fine.
So he's not normally a movie composer. So for the first film, he just made like 30 minutes of score and gave it to them. Okay. And they just chopped it up and put it throughout the film. They used the same they used that score from the first film for this one, and Glass added he created 4 new cues for it. He was not a fan of the first film. He thought he was tricked into scoring a horror film. He thought it was going to be a much more serious like drama, like a character study type thing.
It is.
But yeah, so it is his score entirely, but it's mostly recycled from the first film with a few new pieces, specifically Annie's theme, even though we do hear Helen's theme in this movie.
Well, which we'll get to that, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, but I did want to point out, though, and I know we're going to talk about it later when we get to the actual flashback scene, but going back to your religious aspect, I do think, there's maybe some... he's not crucified, obviously, but the way he's kind of positioned in the frame during his death scene,
right,
it does kind of have that crucifixion look to it, so I can see where that may have been the intent.
Again, just, like, go for that, then. Like, if you're going to do it, then do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So Annie goes back to work, and to prove to these children that there's nothing to be scared of,
I wrote this entire thing down because she talks to these children like they're 4 years old.
Yeah.
This is what, so they're freaking out about Candyman, and this is what she tells them. And just like this, it's just a story, a really scary story. And these just come from Matthew's imagination. There are people in this world who do bad things. Horrible things. And when they don't get caught, we blame the imaginary monsters for their crimes. What the fuck?
Yeah.
These are like teenagers she's talking to.
And they seem to have more sense than she does at this point.
Yes, 100%. It's like, Annie, do you know who you're talking to? Do you know the lived experience of these children?
Right.
This is 100% white savior nonsense. Like, let me tell you how it is. Also, I'm going to call forth someone who is going to brutally murder a bunch of people in front of all of you.
Yeah.
That's actually a fascinating aspect, I think, of these films, though, is that, you know, because, again, who the fuck would even say Candyman in front of a mirror 5 times? It's always almost like a show of, like, machismo, despite the fact that it's always coming from women.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly, yeah. Or men who are literally trying to enact machismo, like, by proving how daring they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she does this, and then it's like, cool, that's done. So she goes home. She and Paul have some exceptionally chaste sex. We have previously learned that he is a bartender, so while she goes into the bathroom to shower, because she's like, well, maybe I'll touch myself a little bit, I'm assuming, he is in the kitchen unable to open a bottle of wine.
Wine, yeah.
I'm sorry, he's a bartender.
Right.
Paul, you suck.
It's silly.
You're shitty.
He's a nothing character.
He really is.
Also, by this point, the movie's almost halfway over. I just want to say that.
Oh my God. But why do I still have so much?
We've accomplished nothing, and we're halfway through the movie.
Oh no. Thankfully this is where we get more Tony Todd, at least. So so Candyman shows up, you know, they do the whole tete-a-tete. He's like, hey, I'm gonna be stalking you for a little bit, and she's like, cool, what? And then Paul shows up, and he is just hoisted into the air and killed in front of her. I do like that she gets a bit of blood splatter on her.
And then she like licks her lips a little bit.
Yep, right in the mouth.
Yeah, there's I'll just say it. We've got a gay director, and she gets that blood facial, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
It's Skeet, yeah. I didn't even think of that. Oh, goodness gracious. That man is nasty.
It does read to me like a bit of a sexual thing, right? Because Candyman, this is his introduction to her. So he's like, I'm going to get rid of your supposed quote unquote lover. And he pronounces himself by like shooting her in the face.
He also tells her to swallow her horror, so.
This is true. Yeah.
Her horror or her whore?
Horror.
Horror. Okay. I was like, swallow your whore. I was like, okay, girl.
It's all very sensual, you know? Like,
Yeah.
he likes to wax poetic about nonsense and stuff. And he goes, swallow your horror and let it nourish you.
Yes.
Come with me and sing the song of misery. Share my world, Annie. Like, it's just a bunch of nonsense. But
Yeah.
it's still really effective because Tony Todd's delivering it.
This movie just lives and dies based on... Okay, so it is tough because in some parts I was like, you know what the problem with this movie is? There ain't enough Tony Todd. Like, how did people leave that first film and not recognize we should have more Tony Todd? But then I do think this movie would be worse if there was more Tony Todd because it would just be leaning into him delivering this kind of brava performance, right? Like, he's so good because you only get these little bits and pieces of him, and I would have worried what would have happened if they have given him more. But at the same time, this movie is dead unless he is on screen.
Yeah. I don't understand her scratching him. Like, it just felt unnecessary.
It felt like, hey, we've got a special effects budget.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do like I think it's probably the best effect in the film. Like, because it looks like the wax from the House of Wax remake, and then the bees crawling.
Right.
Like, I am impressed by all the bee stuff they do.
There's a lot of bees.
But
but
yeah, I'm on y'all's side. I don't really get it.
Yeah, it feels like, okay, well, she can fight back. Ooh, but he's malevolent. He's impossible. She can't defeat him in this way, right? I think it's our first cue that he is invincible, except for his Achilles, his one thing that can be done to hurt him. But with that said, kudos to Tony Todd for filming that scene with actual bees on his face.
Oh yeah,
He took a lot for this film.
I didn't know he filmed that with real bees. I thought that was effects.
No, because I'm again, I haven't seen it in a couple months, but like I'm fairly certain the scene in the first movie when he kisses Helen with the mouthful of bees, I'm pretty sure those are all real as well.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
Condon did say a lot of them got stung quite a bit during this movie.
Wow.
Oh, God.
Yikes. I've never been stung.
EpiPen!
I
EpiPen!
know. Yeah, I've never been stung, so I don't even know if I'm allergic to them.
Ooh, dear.
Yeah.
Well, be careful.
I
Take
will.
care of yourself.
I will.
Yeah, so this attack does not work. She takes off. She goes to the police station to report, hey, oh my God, my husband has been murdered. And Detective Ray is immediately like, well, you're full of shit. This character sucks.
He's the
pretty bad.
worst.
So when that doesn't go over very well, she's collected by her mom and brought back to this ginormous penthouse. And this is where we get the first incident in which her mom shuts up her drawer of exposition secrets.
Ooh.
You're like, ooh, wow.
I just like there's a full on close up of her turning the key in this little box, and you're like, okay, sure. I mean, it'll come out eventually.
I mean,
Right.
I know we've like hinted at this before, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in more detail when it actually does come out. But yeah, it's kind of like her little black box of secrets, of black secrets, actually.
A little black box of black secrets. That's
There we
very
go.
accurate.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
the white penthouse.
Very much that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, then we get this scene where it is eventually revealed to be a nightmare, but initially it seems like Candyman is there in the house. I do love that he kind of gives her an art history slideshow in the kitchen windows where he's like, "This is me in painting form. This is my lover. This is what happened to me." And she's like, "Cool, cool, 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 cool." And then he's like, "I'm gonna kill your mom."
This is the second time we have heard this story in this movie.
There's nothing new to it. That's the problem, right?
Well, and I'll wait till, because I don't know if I have an issue or not with the fact that we have to hear this story about the brutal torture and murder and then witness it at the end of the movie.
Let's just double down on black pain as much as we possibly can.
Right.
I mean, you could argue that it's because we're supposed to be super fucking horrified by what has actually happened to him, but I don't think the film does a good job of clarifying that.
Well, I actually have a question for you two, because I mean, this film arguably makes Candyman more of a sympathetic figure. Like, yes, we know his backstory in the first one, but he's still very much like a malicious, menacing figure, and more of like you're kind of like, ooh, boogeyman. Mm-hmm. This one definitely humanizes him more, and I wonder, does that work for y'all?
I feel like a lot of horror movies have tried to do that, and I don't. I mean, so you think about the whole Jason franchise, right?
Yeah.
You know, he drowns in water. You know, we're supposed to feel bad for his mom. You know, so I mean, I understand why they do it specifically in this film, but it's the way that they did it that doesn't work for me. Like, I mean, why do we have to, and again, this is the social justice in me jumping out. And again, I understand it's 1995. So I always, when I want to jump on my social justice, you know, soapbox, I have to like step back and go, okay, remember the time. But I'm thinking to myself, like, why is it that we always have to humanize a Black body in the sense of like he was mutilated / beat through, why does it have to be through slavery, right? Like, why do we have to do it from that lens? So as much as they try to give him that, I don't know, as much as they were trying to give him that storyline, it just really didn't sit well with me in this film. I don't know why. It just didn't.
No, I think that's a fair assumption. I mean, assumption. I think that's a fair opinion.
I mean, it is weird to also do this film. Like, Trace and I watched Antebellum earlier this year, as he referenced. Did you see that one?
I would not. Nope, I would not.
Yeah, that's
that.
That's also fair.
That is 100% the appropriate reaction, because like, there is just this long historical line of, you know, if we're going to do Black horror, then it has to be centered around slavery, which is like, there are interesting stories to be told there. But
I'll even correct you, though. Not even Black horror. If we're going to tell Black stories, it's going to be slavery.
It always has to be rooted in slavery. And I don't understand why. Like, even in this film, like, if it would have been okay, you know, and I'm not saying that I would want, and again, I think this conversation would be even more interesting if we could have seen the new Candyman and we could have juxtaposed those stories together and said, okay, this is what they did, and this is why it's so important to give Black people the right to tell Black horror films, you know, to tell Black stories in regards to horror film. But I think that the one thing that really I struggled with this film was just that it didn't, even when they tried to humanize him, it still didn't give Tony Todd's character a voice. Like, it still very much kind of made it made the main character still a victim in a way, right? Like, oh, my family history, and he's now chasing me because of that. Like, it still didn't give Tony, I don't know, it just didn't give what I think it was trying to give. Personally.
Well, and it's also about her, how she reacts to this secret, and this honestly treats it as trauma. For her to realize that she is the descendant of this person who is now a monster. Yeah. And that you're right. We don't get a voice for the Daniel character.
I do think that's the biggest problem. Like, I actually think it works well in the first film, and there's still problems with it in that regard. Like, in a way, Helen is the villain of the original Candyman. Right. And I think that's fascinating, if not unproblematic. In this film, my biggest issue is I'm just like, why do we need another fucking white lady as our protagonist? Like, why couldn't you have Matthew or his dad or someone else from that community? Why couldn't this story have been told through that perspective? Like, the people who are directly affected by this violence and this, like this film wants to dance around the dangers of certain communities and certain lifestyles, but it also isn't interested in exploring them. So we have to have this white lady kind of walk through it. Literally, at one scene coming up, she walks down the street, and you're just like, is the horror supposed to be that she's walking in a Black neighborhood? Right. What the fuck?
Yeah, that scene for me was where I was like, I don't know why. And it would have been interesting, like, if I could retell this one, I would have loved to be able to frame it from, you have these young Black kids who don't take horror seriously, this woman is saying, hey, I know this story about the Candyman. You don't want to play with it, right? And, now we have these black kids and, throughout New Orleans playing with the Candyman, and he's chasing after them, and you get that story. That would have been fun for me, right?
Yeah.
Like, that would have been really cool to be able to see it from, like, a young teenager lens of what it's like to be chased. I don't know if you all saw Vampires versus the Bronx. It's a really funny film, but really sort of like that, right? Like, you have these kids who know that Candyman is a real thing. They're trying to tell their parents, and they're trying to invoke this movement. I would have loved to see that in this film, but this notion that you have this white woman who is running through black neighborhoods going, I'm looking for this little black kid. Can you help me? And she's walking through there like she's, scared and cold. And I'm like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
Like,
and of course, they're all scary and intimidating. Like, nobody wants to help her until finally, that's actually where we're at. So it's like we're introduced to Matthew's father, who is a reverend, played by Bill Condon. And of course, he takes pity on her because he is a man of the cloth. Like, save her before something terrible happens to her. And you're just like, she's literally just walking down a street.
Right.
So this is where we get Matthew's shrine to Candyman, but also to her, slightly uncomfortable.
We do get the dad, though, saying that line where he says the police don't give a damn that Matthew's gone. They figure it's just one less potential drug dealer or murderer to worry about. Which, again, that's very timely by today's standards even, but of course still even like in 95.
Yeah.
But it's also a one-off line,
Yeah, like, and then immediately after this, she leaves, and we just see a bunch of kids playing with a dead cat that's covered in bees. So you're like, okay, well, there's figures of quote-unquote good, and these people are being horribly mistreated, like nobody cares about them. But then also, these kids don't care about animals, and you're just like, what is the messaging happening here? Because again, it feels very much like, she's in a bad place. She shouldn't be seeing this kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
You're on the wrong side of town.
Right. So she goes to visit Ethan in jail because he is still a character in this movie. And this is very annoying. It harkens back to what you said earlier, John, which is like that earlier scene. He just deliberately decided not to tell her. And this is that same old shitty thing that they do in horror movies where he's like, oh, well, I was trying to protect you by not telling you.
Right.
She's like, cool, well, I'm in it now.
Yeah, I hate that so much. It's such a terrible fucking trope.
Yeah. So we then get a flashback from Ethan's perspective. It's the only time that we get somebody else's perspective in this movie, and it's where he found his dead dad in that Candyman mural room, and it leads us to a new clue. So the father had found a way to destroy Candyman, but she has to go and seek out a man named Thibodeau, who is an artist and apparently a snowball purveyor, and he is played by Matt Clark.
I found this scene not only just perplexing, but when he said that he didn't know a man by the name of Thibodeau, every other person in New Orleans has the surname Thibodeau. So that does not make sense.
I wonder if he's just like, this lady looks stupid. I can probably get away with this lie.
So what is this about this scene that has y'all like scratching your heads?
Just like, why is it there? Is that what you're confused about, John?
Well, no, because I know y'all mentioned like the snow cone scene, which is a bizarre scene. I was mostly struck just by the long shot we have of the snow cone being
that's why I just want to know why it's that long. It doesn't need to be that long. It felt like it literally felt like it was a 5-minute scene, and I'm going, why? And then the other part of me is going, who really eats snow cones at that time of night? Like, I don't.
Why is he even open?
That was the question I had.
Because again, this is taking place on Fat Tuesday, on Mardi Gras, the day before Lent, because Ash Wednesday happens later in the film. And actually, that is right. Going back to your earlier criticism, John, like there's no reason for this street to not be crowded as hell, even if it's in the quote unquote poor neighborhood. Like people are still partying on Mardi Gras. Like, actually, also schools take Mardi Gras off as a holiday in New Orleans.
So I'm just. It felt like I'm like, it just didn't sit well. I'm like, why? Like, I'm like, I don't understand so I get why she went to him, but I'm going like, why wasn't it just a very, simple, I'm going to drop, hey, can I get some help? Okay. Like it just didn't feel, I don't know. It didn't feel authentic for me.
It's very much like this is a man who is shady because he's living a double life. He's got a secret back room, but also the front is a snow cone dispensary. And he's obviously mixed up in weird stuff because I think we're meant to assume that drunk lady who's given her shit is like a sex worker, maybe, or just like a troubled woman.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely read this red snowball bullshit as either a sex thing or a blood
snowballing
thing.
is a sex thing, but it doesn't involve that.
No. And we're not going to talk about that because we've talked about that before too. No, I think that it's like a visual signifier to tie in to the fact that this is the right Thibodeau, and he, if this whole thing is about genealogy, then it's about blood. So he is the gateway to revealing the genealogy clue.
I mean, and that's why they spend so much time pushing the syrup onto the snowball. Is that why we got that shot?
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Let's say you want to make a really pretentious read out of this. It could be that the snow cone, because it's white, it is now tainting the whiteness with red.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
With blood.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just going,
I don't think that's the reason for it. I'm being pretentious about it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going, I feel like you could be pretentious about this whole film at this point because there's so many unwritten subtexts that it just doesn't make sense. But yeah. Yes, I get it. Mm-hmm.
So she accompanies him into the secret back room, and this is important because she's actually also being followed, unbeknownst to her, by Detective Ray and some guy that we never learn his name, and he never appears again in the film. But Detective Ray is, of course, on her because he is now convinced that it is not Ethan who has been committing the murders, but Annie. This 90-pound woman is going around murdering people. Sure. Okay. So Thibodeau gives her the next clue, which is more or less that if she wants to break this curse, she has to find the hand mirror of Candyman's love, Carolyn, who will be eventually played by Carolyn Barclay.
It's actually kind of funny, though, right? So Bill Condon has now done 2 movies that involve magic mirrors. One is this, and the other one is that Beauty and the Beast remake.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a type.
He probably used the same mirror prop.
He probably did. I love that.
Oh my God,
connection.
it's a cinematic universe.
Oh man.
I mean, this movie could be considered a Beauty and the Beast story.
Yeah.
What? A Beauty and the Bee?
I love it. Also, that sounds like a Disney Plus show that I also want to watch.
Yes, Beauty and the Bee. Ridiculous.
Okay, so Annie is like having weird hallucination flashbacks that make no sense. Like, why would she be getting this just by looking at a painting of Carolyn? And while this is happening, poor Thibodeau is just having a swarm of deadly bees unleashed upon him, and then his body gets thrown through the wall. And she's like, oh shit, I better run.
It's a fun little set piece, but yeah.
I do like it because I'm trying to think of the last time I saw a body just get thrown head first through a wall and somebody running by being like, whoa, what the shit's going on in there? Okay, so have we mentioned the slow-mo before this? Because we get some egregious slow-mo as she runs through this Mardi Gras parade and she's pursued by Candyman, and I think it's meant to be tense, but she just ducks down an alley and seemingly goes into a random person's house, but it's actually revealed to be her house.
And let's just say this right here. Yeah, Condon directs the film as competently as he can.
Sure.
There is no atmosphere in this movie.
No.
And the lack of atmosphere means there's no scares, except for those jump scares, which, as we've already said, are very egregious. And that's what really hurts this. Like, I was honestly watching this, like, I know I made a comment to how, like, when I watched Candyman when I was a teenager, I thought it was boring. Obviously not the case anymore. But watching this, like, I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of boring. Like, I'm not involved in this woman's plight, and it's just not filmed in a way that makes me feel on the edge of my seat.
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
It gives you very little space to be invested in the film. If I think that's what it, you're very much, that's what I think the biggest issue is that you're not committed, nor are you invested in this woman's safety. Like there's nothing, I don't know, there's just nothing that comes of it. I think that's the thing that really makes it hard for me to, in terms of watching it.
It's so hard because I feel like this movie gives us a lot of Annie. Like, it's trying to tell us who she is and how she feels. And it's something between the performance and the writing and also, Condon's sort of stilted direction that I just can't care.
Yep, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so she's like, cool, I'm being pursued by this guy, but now that I'm safe, I'm going to take a shower. So we get some G-rated nudity. And just in case you didn't see it coming, she, of course, gives her belly a little bit of a rub just to let us know that she's pregnant. Because, of course, again, genealogy. We got to continue the cycle. So I'm just going to fast forward a little bit through some of this. She goes to the Reverend. She discovers these slave records. And also she takes a trip to Carolyn's gravesite where she finds out that Carolyn did have a daughter.
So this is the thing, though, right? So in the first movie, we were told that his body was burned, his ashes were spread on the ground that became Cabrini Green. Why does he have a space inside of a mausoleum?
He doesn't. This is Carolyn's.
No, his is right next to it.
Is it?
Yeah, I thought his was next to it. That's what I got.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe Carolyn was like, oh, because I don't have a place to go and visit him, I'll just give him, like, they buried the empty headstone. Yeah.
Just an empty space next to her.
Ridiculous.
They do that sometimes if they can't recover bodies and
do.
stuff. But yeah. Oh, sorry. We also learned that Daniel Robital was born in the slave quarters in her house. So at this point, she thinks that they are connected because of that. And again, that could have been an interesting thing where it was like, oh, we were the owners of this person, but it's not. It's actually that she's like his great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter.
No, it's not even that far. I mean, on it, because her mother is his granddaughter.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So it's like it's not even like that, right? Because you're like, oh, like it's clear, yeah, it's like great. No. It's like
not three generations.
Yeah.
Fuck. Okay. So I'm uninterested in Annie, so let's just jump away from her for a little bit. Let's go back to the precinct, because everybody cares about what's happening at the precinct.
Right.
And we get this extended sequence where Detective Ray is just berating Ethan about how Annie has committed all these murders. Ethan's like, you're kind of cuckoo. So Detective Ray just summons Candyman right then and there and is promptly murdered. It's probably the most gratifying moment in the film.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Especially when his body goes, again, in slow motion, through the window and lands on that poor lady's desk. I was like, well, her day's ruined and now she needs therapy.
And they put that, I noticed that they have put up like a board in front of it too. Like there's a shot where you could see, I don't know, it's just so random, but yes. Very much yes.
Mm-hmm. Like, we still need this interrogation room, but we can't have that open air coming in, so let's board it up and just keep going. Yeah, let's
board it up and keep it moving.
Yeah. Ethan, at this point, is also shot and killed in slow motion, trying to escape.
Like so unceremoniously, to the point where we're just like, why does this character even exist?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And all the slow-mo shots. Why?
I think this is confusion for, this will make the movie more cinematic and interesting.
Oh,
probably.
Okay.
I also think that the only reason Ethan and this detective get murdered here is because if not, it would go too long without a set piece.
That makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's not a good reason, but it feels like somebody had the stopwatch and was like, we haven't had a murder in about 10 to 12 minutes, so gonna need you to throw one in there. So, okay, let's get a confrontation. Annie sneaks into her mom's penthouse. She unlocks the drawer of secrets to confirm that, Candyman and I are related. Octavia shows up. She's super wasted. She's all like, no, he's not related to us.
So we should talk about this scene, right? Like, This is... I mean, again, there's a lot that could be unpacked in this scene, specifically with Octavia's, like, essentially internalized racism, how they are descendants of a dark-skinned black man, but are the whitest of white people.
Right. I'm like, Rachel True wasn't available for this one? Like, I mean...
Right?
Yeah.
But again, I mean, I don't have any personal experience with, like, I don't know, with colorism, I guess, but I know it's an issue that exists.
Yeah, very much yes.
But because we're dealing with something that, like, it's just white creators with white actors, it's just like, that's not even like a thing that's brought up, is how they're white passing, or like how they have also, I want to say, even like profited off of this man's murder by owning this plantation house.
Yeah, like they have come through this crystal clear. The worst thing that they have is a couple of damning photographs that Octavia actively looks like she wants to get rid of, and yet she just keeps locked up for a convenient reveal midway through this film.
Right.
And, you know, we're doing the Nightmare on Elm Street parent thing where it's like, Mom, I can't believe you didn't tell me about the truth. And the mom's like, no, it's not true. Glug, 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 glug.
Yeah.
I do like the line, you can't wash him away with a bottle. Sure. You go, Annie.
She's the hero here.
Yeah. So, of course, this is where Candyman shows up and he guts Octavia. It's pretty good. And she's still alive enough to activate Chekhov's alarm, because it was a big issue earlier when the kid showed up to say that Matthew had disappeared. And she was like, oh, I don't want to let people into my penthouse. It's also a panic room. And here she's like, panic room, setting off this alarm. So the police burst in. And, of course, Annie is still a prime suspect. 90-pound Annie still is prime suspect. So she runs out the back door, which the police didn't bother to check. Mm-hmm. She runs into Detective Pam, who we have not talked about because Detective Pam has not been in this movie for the most part. Mm-hmm. And Pam is like, cool, I believe you. I'm going to let you go. And also, I'm piecing out of this movie. You will never see me again.
Yeah.
Why did you cast this actress who actually is charismatic? And this character could be interesting. It's one of only a few people of color who actually has lines in this movie.
Yeah.
And what the fuck? Okay, sure.
I spent more time looking at her eyes than I did her actual acting. I don't know why. I just did.
I mean, she's very beautiful.
But that's it. That's her last scene.
That's it. Yep. She is gone. Thank you, Pam. That is a set wrap on Detective Pam.
Look, she doesn't even come in during the climax, like, do anything. Like, she's just, out of the movie because her
Girl,
case
you better
is
run.
solved,
Yeah, she gives her very much, like, slave, like, master coming. You better run. Like, it's just like, why? Like, I don't understand it, but okay.
Yeah.
So.
Oh my God, you are right, because she has taken the back way out of the penthouse. So it's like, it's an upstairs, downstairs kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're back on the street. We still got Mardi Gras shit happening. Shout out to the couple who are just having sex on the side of the street.
Right on the wall, baby.
That is Mardi Gras. That happens.
There we go. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of this, a little bit of beat action. Shout out to my man Kingfish. This is where we get to see him. He is speaking at the front of the parade in like the elevated building. He is dressed as Dionysus, and yeah,
that's
cool.
it.
That's it.
So the hour we have just spent hearing his voiceover, it just means nothing at all.
Nothing at all. Except, hey kids, did you know that we're coming up on 10 minutes to midnight, which is when Annie's gotta like do her shit.
Wait, so is there like a time clock on this?
I think the idea is that things will come to a head, like he will come for her at midnight on Lent.
Okay. If you say so.
I mean, I just noticed because they keep referencing the countdown to the day of, and like he does come for her right at the end of the day. So Annie goes home, back to her derelict mansion there, and this is where she finds Matthew. He's completely fine. He's just apparently been hanging out in this house the whole time? Question mark? I don't know why. Yeah,
I was really confused, but I didn't even put it together with what you said earlier when you were like, oh, he's just staying at the slave house, which the implication of that is just very bizarre. But yeah, he's just been standing. But okay, when did he go missing time-wise in this film? Because was it earlier that day?
I think it's earlier that day. So he's been missing for the better part of the day.
Okay. That makes maybe a little bit more sense. Like, he wasn't, like, spending the night there and stuff.
But also, everyone acts like he was abducted. And clearly he's just, like, he literally says, I've just been waiting for you to show up here. It's like, but why?
Yeah, I don't understand it. It's just he randomly pops up and there's no real good explanation for it.
To the point where you think, oh, okay, it's because we need somebody else to put in danger so that Annie will do what Candyman needs her to do. But then Matthew is kind of immediately booted out of this because she just falls through the floor into a crib filled with poop water, and then it's her versus Candyman.
Well, because this would have been a good opportunity to do the role reversal and have him save her, right? Right. But they don't do that.
No, again, Matthew is just another character the movie doesn't seem to know what to do with. Yeah, so she falls down through the floor of the slave quarters. Candyman's there. She does find the hand mirror. This is kind of a cool looking set. We've got skeletons that are hanging from the ceiling.
It's very
Again,
poltergeisty.
I feel like it's meant to be that kind of cultural critique, right? Like, we're in the slave quarter and these are bodies of former slaves.
Yeah.
But it's like, cool. You gonna do anything more about it? No? Okay.
Nope.
Cool. Let's just move on. Yeah.
Just float out. All right, girl.
So this is where we find out that the hand mirror is the secret of Candyman's strength, the keeper of his soul, the destiny of our family.
That's the thing too. Each of these movies does a different thing. So like in the first one, it's like, oh, people stop talking about him, then he's forgotten. This one, it's a mirror. The third one, it's a painting. Like, make up your mind, people.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little Wishmaster, a little Hellraiser. It's cobbled together. So this is where we get our flashback. Just in case you didn't know what the story was, hey folks, here's a scene of Tony Todd being chased, mutilated, smeared in honey. I do, shout out to this little shit boy and that hoity-toity bitch who give him the name Candyman and say sweets to the sweet. Because those are the kinds of deplorable white people that I want to see in a black horror film. Like, I want to see those two people, but then I want to see them get murdered.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't happen in this movie.
It does not happen. Instead, we just get a terrible CGI swarm of bees. So bad.
Yeah.
I do think the sawing off of the hand is a really, really good effect. But again, I'm of the mindset where I'm like, from a simple narrative standpoint, okay, I've already heard this story twice. I don't need to see it again. The only reason to see this scene is to see him suffer. That is the only reason this scene exists, and that is a problem for me. Not even, I don't know. It just leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
I think particularly at this point in the film too, right? Like, we've heard the story twice and now we're seeing it play out visually, but there's no new information being presented except for the fact that we literally see his image captured in the mirror and then Carolyn runs away with it. But we also already knew that from Annie's encounter with Thibodeau. So I appreciate that they're showing as opposed to telling, but they've already told.
Right.
So I don't know why we need it.
And we really don't. But I think that that's the gist of this film. We really didn't even need this second film. However, but here we are. So, and I don't say that disrespectfully. I just think if we're not going to, if Candyman in himself was just this scary entity that was kind of, thought up or connected to like maybe some sort of like New Orleans tradition, and he comes every, kind of like Jeepers Creepers, right? We know Jeepers Creeper comes every 16, 17, whatever years, he flies around and eats children or eats, teenage boys. That's his jizz, that's his jush, right?
That's his
jizz. Sorry, his just. I was gonna say that's his jush. That's his judge. He goes after, twink kids, twink boys. However, with the story, it's like we're constantly being brought back to this idea of like slavery, and it's like, why are we here? And I think towards the end of the film, even in that scene when we see him lose his hand and we're like, oh, okay, let's continue to keep the black people who are watching this film, let's keep reiterating what would have happened to them if they would have messed around with a white woman in the early 1900s. Okay, good to know. Like, it's just, I don't know. There's just a lot of thoughts that I have about that scene in particularly.
And the film definitely, like, both the first and the second film lean into it, but it feels like this film leans into it a little bit harder, which is his only issue was that he dared to fall in love with a white woman. And like, this film opens up with, the Purcell character literally saying something about like, I can't remember what the quote was, but it's something to do with like his love was his downfall or his crime or something like that.
Yeah.
And it feels like it wants to romanticize that, like this character didn't deserve that. But then the way that this film presents it is, here's victim, like black violence, and then it turns there's no moment of catharsis. It's just, and this is what he became. He's a monster. He wants to kill this white lady now.
But again,
Right.
that's also because it's not about him, and that
Right.
that is a problem. And this actually, I mean, it's from earlier when we were getting the secret, like the secret stuff, the genealogy. But Condon does say, he's like, one of the things we could do in this movie is explore the issue of the great original sin of American history, racism, and and slavery, and the idea of, on symbolic terms, that this white woman is somehow unable to completely create a life or create an identity for herself, and it's because she's sitting on a secret that generations before have buried deeper in the mud. It finally comes up and explodes and becomes something that she has to deal with. Okay,
But she doesn't deal with it.
but even that, with that statement, okay, sure, maybe the intention was good. Why are we making a commentary about racism and it's the white woman that has to deal with it? And then when we have the black man, he's not only a villain, but he's also just suffering through the whole thing.
Right. That's basically my point.
Let's make her fucking accountable and actually have to have her deal with it, not be like, oh, this poor woman, look at what she has to go through because of her drunk, lying mom.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, that's the narrative about racism that really needs to be told.
Mm-hmm. Poor Karen.
So we have now seen, yes, oh my gosh, this hand mirror, that is the key to everything. So let's get to this climax. This is an admittedly cool scene. So it's been raining this whole time, and the floodgates presumably have broken in some capacity because the walls begin to cave in.
Well, and New Orleans is super below sea level, so like that's
Yeah.
why like it's really easy to flood, and like the issue with the cemeteries there is a big thing because sometimes like coffins will just come up out of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just it's fun, and I think this sequence actually looks, this is the most interesting part of the film visually for me. So she almost drowns, and it's only because the kids rescue her that she is saved. But then Candyman does a little Jesus-y thing where he floats up out of the water and he's just kind of standing on it, which is pretty cool. And he doesn't attack her, he just sort of stands there and talks to her. So she's like, cool, I'm just going to break this hand mirror. And then 1995 FX calls, and he cracks and explodes into a million CGI pieces.
That made me chuckle.
Yeah. I did appreciate the cradle is your grave, not mine. I actually thought that was a pretty good like send out for her to say.
All right.
But yeah, that 1995 CGI is unintentionally. I mean, but it didn't even look good in 95, you know?
No, this actually, again, reminded me of Lord of Illusions, where we talked about how not good some of those FX were. And I think they just hadn't really figured out how to do things with people. Like, they didn't know how to break people apart in a convincing way. Again, this would have been something where I would have loved to have seen some kind of practical effect where maybe he explodes or just vanishes in some capacity.
Yeah. Or even a whole, like, he combusts into a whole bunch of bees. Like, that would have been really interesting. And then the bees fly away.
Would have made more sense.
I would have been like, oh, okay, or they go, and then they fly into like a hive. And, it's just something to that sort. But the CGI during that scene was what I think made me chuckle the loudest.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just, it was bad. It's bad.
Not good. So, of course, they are fine now. They escape, and this slave house is swept away in the flood. So, our denouement is the next morning. We see Annie. She is dressed up in traditional final girl accoutrement. So, she's got her white tank top on, and she and Matthew are getting communion before they wander out into the dawn. So, it's a little on the nose, but sure, it works. And then we flash forward to years later where Annie, because remember, she was pregnant. She now has a daughter of her own who is named Caroline, and she is showing family photos, which now includes both Carolyn as well as Daniel Robitel. So it kind of feels like this is meant to be that moment of catharsis where, okay, Annie has now accepted who she is, what her family line is, how she is related to this trauma, and she has welcomed it by passing the story along. So this idea of saying not Candyman, but Daniel Robital, and it's all good. And then, of course, this little brat wakes up and she wants to look at the mirrors in her mobile and summon Candyman, and we end with Annie rushing in and keeping her quiet before she can say it a fifth time.
That jump scare got me, I won't lie. I actually really that was the one effective jump scare of this movie.
The very final scene.
I have mixed thoughts about that though, because it's okay, so she has to be comfortable passing on the story, like she has to accept it. you can read it one of two ways, though, right? It's either like she's accepting the fact that she is a descendant of this villainous person, or if you want to go the extra layer, it's she's a descendant of a villainous black person. So like, which one is the one that she's having to come to terms with more, right? That it's a black man or that it's a villainous man?
Oh, I read it as because she's naming Daniel and not Candyman, she has separated the two of them. So she is acknowledging the slave who, made the mistake of falling in love with a white woman and then he was killed for it. So she's saying, yes, that is part of the family. And she's not acknowledging Candyman and the legend and the murder.
Right.
Which to me is kind of like, well, it's dissociation. And you're basically just saying this terrible thing did not produce this other terrible thing. So that's some selective memory, but sure.
That's it then, right? I mean, like, listeners, if you don't know, Caroline, the little girl, is the main character in the third one.
Played by Baywatch's Donna D'Errico with giant boobs that the director-writer literally cannot help but salivate and, like, jizzing about all the time.
Final thoughts on Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, y'all?
My final thoughts would be, you have got to be very, very, very bored if this is your go-to. However, if you are a person who enjoys, really bad films, I think, and I say really bad films lovingly, if you're not looking to think too much during a film, this is a great film for that. Do I think that there is space for this film to be rethought and re-envisioned? Yes, I think there's a lot of potential for this film to be re-envisioned, but I definitely think that this film is one of those films that will probably go down in the history of, if I never have to see it again, it's probably going to be too soon.
Right.
Not being mean, but that's just real.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it's mean. I think it's a valid, and I think especially too in the 25 years since this film has come out, and like how much we as a society have changed and also not changed.
Right.
I do wish, like you, that we could see Nia DaCosta's film, because I think it's going to be interesting to see if that will maybe retroactively like put the sequel. Because is it doing the Halloween thing where it's kind of ignoring the sequels?
I think it might only be acknowledging the first film,
which is fine with me. So, like, then the second and third film can just kind of be these fun, like, alternate dimension Candyman films, I guess.
Right,
sure.
Right.
They're the snow cone of the Candyman world. Pleasant diversions, a little bit sweet, and completely inconsequential.
Right, right.
Yeah, I'm just kind of in the mindset where it's like, I didn't hate it. Obviously, when you're looking at it with the critical eye, like, it's... There are, and now especially in the current climate we live in today, the political climate, it's definitely an interesting watch that there are a lot of issues with. I don't think there was any like ill intent here. I mean, I think everyone had the best of intentions. I think they all thought they were just making a horror movie. Like there was no real thought at messages or themes here, even though Condon clearly like mentions them, but right. the screenplay doesn't do anything to develop those ideas, as we've said ad nauseum. It's fine. Like I wish it was just a bit more exciting, and it's not. It's honestly kind of a boring film, but yeah, I'm glad I get to finally see it, and now I'll be able to go into to DaCosta's film with like, having seen the whole original trilogy, which is, I guess, good.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, this is a frustrating watch. I don't disagree with anything either one of you has said. It's, it's a fine film. If you're willing to overlook a lot of things or not think about it critically, I do just feel really frustrated at the idea that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but really this is the only franchise featuring like a marginalized, like a black villain. And it frustrates me that there's only 3 films in it, that 2 of them aren't very good. And really, Tony Todd doesn't get to stretch his acting muscles very much. So yeah. It just kind of reinforces this idea where I understand why there's a lot of black horror fans who might look at this and be like, well, this is the only franchise that we get. It's not all that good. And also all of these other supporting characters kind of suck. So Like, why are we being fed leftovers when we love the genre as much as other people? Like, if I was a Black viewer, I would be very frustrated watching this movie because I'd be like, this is not a story that I'm interested in seeing told.
Right.
And, like, frankly, that's what excites me the most about DaCosta's vision is I don't think we're going to get a fucking white lady in the front talking about racism and, like, slavery. I think we're going to have Black bodies front and center. I'm hoping that trauma and slavery, if it is part of that narrative, is going to be more thoughtfully incorporated into the film, or maybe jettisoned if we're just going to like talk about other things for a fucking change. Sorry, that was ranty.
No, it's not. I think it's very fair.
When you're talking about any film that deals with major social issues, I mean, like, again, like if this is also, if it's added a queer element to it and handled the things in a similarly, well, I'm sorry, if it mishandled them in a similar way, we would also want to rant about it. I think it's something that you have to be able to talk about.
Yeah.
But heady conversation for a not heady movie. So, okay, well, before we announce what we're covering next week, John, can you let everyone know where they can find you on social media?
Yes, if you want to hear more about my rants and about how I ultimately am not pleased with certain films that are coming out, feel free to follow me on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook by using the hashtag @DrJonPaul. You can also find me at www.drjohnpaul.com. And you actually have to spell that out. That's DOCTORJONPAUL.
That happens a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah. I was looking for you, and I'm like, which kind of? I put DR, and I'm like, no, you have to spell out the doctor, and then the John has no H, and they're okay. So yeah, that happens a lot.
Spelling is hard.
Yeah, sorry, but here we are.
Well, thank you again for coming on. Again, I know that this may not have been the first Candyman film you would ever want to talk about, but we really appreciate it.
No, it was fun. It was really fun. It was fun to watch it. It was fun to watch it with a more critical eye, and it was also really fun to break it down. I really had a good time, y'all.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram @HorrorQueers and join our Facebook Horror Queers group to hang out with other listeners. If you have a moment, please rate and review us on your podcatcher of choice, but Apple Podcasts is our podcatcher of choice, so do that one. And if you want even more Horror Queers content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/HorrorQueers. November is pretty much over after this, so we're moving into December, the last month of this hellish fucking year. We'll, of course, be doing our best and worst horror films as a mini-sode, but we'll also have full-length episodes on Brendan Cronenberg's Possessor and Christopher Landon's Freaky, which is finally hitting VOD after a short theatrical stint. And we'll also have an audio commentary on Dial Code Santa Claus, which is currently streaming on Shudder. If y'all just had a big question mark pop over your heads, that's understandable. It is a really fucking fun, awesome R-rated Home Alone movie that actually came out the year before Home Alone. The director of this film tried to sue the studio when Home Alone came out, saying it was plagiarism.
Yeah, apparently it kicks ass, so I'm excited to check it out.
It's amazing. It's super fun. Joe, what are we talking about next week?
Well, as you said, because we're out of November and into December, I'm feeling just a touch festive. So I thought we should kick off the month of December with a little Krampus action.
Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous. I love that movie so much.
Well, shit. We brought you on for a film that you hated.
Well, no, I didn't hate it. Let's be clear. I didn't, in the words of Rihanna, let's be clear. I did not hate it. I have a lot of thoughts about it. But Krampus is one of my all-time favorite movies, FYI. I just want to share that.
Oh my God.
Okay.
No, I really like it. I think Joe is a bit in the kind of on the mid-level for it, but I'm hoping that he like finds new appreciation for it when he rewatches it.
Yeah,
It's so good.
Okay, well, I'm going in with new eyes, so now that I know exactly what it's going to be doing, I'm excited to revisit it.
Okay.
Well, again, everyone, thank you for listening. John, thank you for coming on. And on that note, we can cross out Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh.
Yes, and cross out Horror Queers.
You've made it to the end of another bloody, disgusting podcast. Congratulations. If you like our programming, consider searching for other bloody disgusting podcasts, such as Creepy, Horror Queers, The Boo Crew, SCP Archives, Nightlight, Margaret's Garden, Nightmare on Film Street, and more.
Hello, I'm Shelby Scott, the host of Scare You to Sleep, a podcast where I tell you spooky bedtime stories full of creepy sound effects and music that is soothing yet unsettling to help immerse you into a world of horror. This is a show for those of us who have realized horror can be a strange but relaxing escape from reality. Speaking of escapes, sometimes I lead you through guided nightmares, like a guided meditation, but instead of flowery meadows, I take you on a journey through your own personal nightmare. So come get lost in the terror with me. Listen to Scare You to Sleep wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us online at bloody.fm. Sweet screams.